Assalamu alaikum. In this chapter 16, we try to study tools of monetary policy. This chapter can be divided into three subtitles, three parts. We'll study market of the reserves. We'll study effects of change in monetary policy tools on FF rate. FF rate is federal fund rate. We will study in the third part conventional and non-conventional monetary policy tools. But before we study, we have to distinguish between three types of interest rates in the central bank. First is federal fund rate. We mentioned in chapter 15 that financial institutions keep their reserves at the central bank, and the central bank uses these reserves to lend financial institutions. So when financial institutions borrow from the central bank for very short term overnight loan, so financial institutions should pay the price. Price here is FF. FF is federal fund rate. So federal fund rate is interest rate on overnight loans from the central bank. Okay, this FF. The second type of interest rate is discount rate. When the financial institution borrow from the central bank, financial institution must pay low interest rate, special interest rate called the discount rate. And finally, rate on reserves. Starting from 2008, Federal Bank in USA starts to pay interest rate on reserves of the financial institution. Before 2008, central bank was paying nothing. So financial institutions keep their reserves and receive no interest rate on these reserves. But start from 2008, the central bank starts to pay interest rate on the reserves of the financial institutions. Now we move to study the first market. First part is market for reserves. Market means we have product, we have price, we have demanders or demand for, and we have suppliers or supply of. The product here is reserves of the financial institutions at the central bank. We have demand for, comes from demanders. Demand here, financial institutions. So financial institution demand for reserves from the central bank. And we have supplier. Supplier here is the central bank. Central bank supplies reserves to be borrowed from the financial institutions. And we have the price. Price here is federal fund rate. When the financial institution demand for reserves, financial institutions must pay FF rate or federal fund rate. Now we have to study the two sides. We start with the demand for reserves. Demand curve for reserves consists of two parts. Downward part, and the reason for downward part is as demand law states. When the price decreases, the quantity demand will increase. So when FF decreases, financial institution will demand more from reserves, so there is negative relationship between quantity demanded for reserves and FF federal fund rate. So negative relationship between them. So demand curve in this part is downward sloping curve. The other part is flat part. I show you the shape of the demand for reserves. This is demand for reserves. On the vertical axis we have FF. On the other one, horizontal axis we have quantity of amount of reserves demanded and supplied. So this part was downward because there is negative relationship between FF and demand for reserves. Flat part means perfectly elastic. When FF is very, very low, at the lowest level of FF, when FF equals to IOR interest on reserves, in this situation, so we have infinitive demand for reserves, of course, because the price is very low. very, very low. So demand curve consists of, as I said, two parts, downward part and flat part. Now supply curve as well consists of two parts. Okay, this part, vertical part, and flat one, horizontal one. Vertical part because when FF is less than discount rate, ID means discount rate. So in this situation, the central bank just supply non-borrowed MB, non-borrowed. Okay, so in this situation, so we have just fixed MB, fixed amount should be supplied by the central bank. So when the central bank, when the supply curve is vertical part, so the federal bank doesn't willing to supply funds for lending because IFF is less than ID. The only amount of reserves is supplied for financial institution to borrow from it. So we have fixed reserves, fixed amount of reserves if IFF is less than ID. But when IFF is equals to ID, in this situation, central bank is willing to supply infinitive amount to borrow from the central bank, from the financial institutions. So when the central bank, when the FF is equals to ID, in this situation, central bank has infinitive supply of reserves to be, of funds to be borrowed from the financial institutions. Now we have demand curve and supply curve. Now we move to the equilibrium between them. Equilibrium, interaction between demand for reserves and supply of reserves. We can find the equilibrium position by using equations as you studied in ECON 140. We can explain, we can understand, we can study equilibrium position by using equation if we have demand equation and supply equation, or by using schedules if we have demand schedule and supply schedule, or by using curves as this case we have demand curve and supply curve. So to study equilibrium we put both of them, demand curve and supply curve in one graph. Can we do it? Yes. Why? Think about the answer. The question is why we can draw demand curve for reserves and supply for reserves in one graph. Think about the answer. Okay, so both of them in one graph. So we have this situation. Both curves intersect in E, or at E points. At E points when demand curve is downward. So E is equilibrium point and I star FF is equilibrium federal fund rate. Above this point, above IF star FF, we have excess supply, surplus. Supply is greater than demand. Supply of reserves is greater than demand for reserves. At any level of I star FF less than IFF, at any level of IFF less than I star FF, we have excess demand or deficit. Why? Because quantity demand for reserves is greater than supply of reserves. But at E point, we haven't access reserves and we haven't access demand because both are equal. Demand equals to supply. This one possibility of equilibrium. Another two possibilities of equilibria is when both demand and supply intersect in at highest level of IFF. When IFF equals to discount rate. At E, IFF equals to discount rate. This one issue, one equilibrium of the three equilibria we can reach it. The third one is when we have intersect between demand for reserves and supply of reserves at lowest level of IFF, when IFF equals to IOR, interest on reserves. So we have three possibilities of equilibria. One, when demand curve is downward sloping curve. The second one, when the IFF is at its highest level, when IFF equals to discount rate. And the third one, the final one, is when IFF is at lowest level of H when IFF equals to IOR. In the next video, inshallah, we'll start to explain the effects of a change in monetary policy tools on equilibrium position in the reserve market or on IFF rate. Thank you very much and have a nice time.